I've spoken a lot the past couple of minutes. So actually, and also just to kind of maybe keep on time, well, thank you for the presentations, of course. Both very inspiring projects or practices. I think actually first, I wanted to know if you had questions to each other, or a question to us even, or any reflections on what you've seen today.
Well, I have microphones, so let me talk. Not maybe a question. Thank you very much for these two presentations as well. Very happy to be here. I was listening to the two presentations, and I was thinking that I noticed we had three things in common, weirdly, because we don't know each other, but same, different parts from Europe, different backgrounds, but still we have I noticed three important things to me. First thing, it is weird, but we all doubt a lot. No, I believe. That's very important, our generation. I think that we're not really sure about what we do. We're kind of sure about the questions we raise, but we believe that we're not very sure about the answers. So this is something I noticed as well. We teach, all of us. And I think that's very important in the way we do architecture. We think about architecture, the way we spray the words to the students, to the younger generations, and to us, but I believe to you too, this is something we can talk about. It's a way to test and verify that what we do is kind of okay. If the way we say it to students is fine, then it is maybe fine also in the practice. And last thing, which was very, very important as well, is we all draw a lot. And to us, we've been thinking with Heather, with Annie, with the rest of the office, that to draw is to care. And I've noticed in the two presentations that we followed that you draw also a lot. So we do different drawings, but that's not the purpose. But when I was, for instance, looking at the way you draw the moment of the casting of the concrete, is a way to care about anything that is involved in the cast of the concrete. And in your case, when we're expressing all the details of the building you were refurbishing, to draw is to care, and to care is to be indulgent to the real we are, let's say, going through every day. Well, that was something I wanted to tell you, but I don't know where it leads.
Maria, Florian, do you have any observations from today?
Yeah, for me it was, thank you also for the presentations. That was really interesting. I found it quite interesting in your case that you're actually referring back to more heavyweight architecture, which is quite interesting, because when we have to deal with the municipality or client or something, it's always about how to get it more lightweight, and people are even scared of going away from metal roof and taking again ceramic tiles, because oh no, it's going to be more heavy. And it's quite interesting once you have the massive timber, you have the really stone load bearing, so it's going back really like to the very massive architecture. It's quite interesting. How is there that narrative or questions do you come up that people say about the weight of the building or something, or is this never coming actually up?
No, I think when we're talking about mass and heaviness and the density of the materials we're working with, it's not really a question about weight, but it's often a question about cost. And I think that's something that's really important when we're talking about building today. It's sort of adjusting our parameters of cost. And saying, these natural materials, these are heavy, these are very thick and full materials. They're often associated with higher costs because they're harder to manipulate, because they occupy more of the habitable space. We work with a lot of developers so that they can be sold, that we can use to make a profit out of it. And so I think, it's more a question of cost, and I think that as architects we have a really important role also to open a conversation about what we consider expensive, and is it just the financial cost of the materials up front? Is it the cost of the construction with these materials? Or is it the environmental cost of these materials over their entire life cycle? Is it the cost of using the building long term because it is more or less expensive to heat and to run? And then of course in certain contexts the weight of materials comes into play. I think about the project we showed, which was a 50-meter tall tower, and so yeah, when you have 50 meters of stone which is load bearing and coming down to the ground, then it does pose technical questions, but they're not insurmountable questions, and that's what's really nice for us too, is to be able to find partnerships with engineers and other specialists that are working with us again to show our clients, to show public powers that the fact that we're building with these heavyweight materials, it's not. It shouldn't be seen as just sort of a full stop or a break or an impossibility. That's something that needs to be studied, it needs to be measured, it needs to be carefully considered, but it's possible.
I'll ask one common question, and maybe then we can check the audience. And I think it's I also put in an email maybe beforehand, but I feel like, so it's an international audience panel here, and there's mostly Estonians I think sitting in the audience. They're like, this is like France, they can do that there. Like, we can't do it here, obviously. Like, it's a different climate. It's just like raining outside and it's freezing tomorrow and whatever.
Just like in Paris.
Just like in Paris. Yeah. So, but then when we look at these materials or images that inspire us, like, oh, this is like a hempcrete building, or this is a stone building in the middle of Paris. In Estonia we also have, or I guess maybe in the Baltics as well, or Latvia as well, we have this sort of a bit of like an anxiety as well, like this is like the Western, the Central Europe stuff, but we are here like just lagging along. So maybe first question like to you, but also to Maria and Florian about like how do you actually justify, or what are the limits of materials? We think of like stone being stone in Estonia, in France, but actually what makes a big difference is the regulations, the building skills, even the skills or the regulations between countries. They're so different in different countries all around the world. So I wonder, like, how do you what are you inspired by, or do you look at other countries to take inspiration from? And what are the limits of materials in your country?
Well, actually, I'm not.
No, yeah, of course.
Actually, I'm not from Latvia, and I'm not from the Baltics. So I actually come from Germany to the Baltics. So for me, it was much about also learning new how actually things are done. Like we studied also like actually in Norway and Austria. So we have a lot of different backgrounds, like where we know how in different countries buildings are constructed, and yeah, that was then very interesting for me, like personally, to learn this more Baltic context, like the history of architecture and like how nowadays things are done. So for me, it was a very new experience, also like to work here. Back to the question. Yeah, the materials. Like I think there's even a really big difference between Estonia and Latvia, because like you have way more the stone, what you mentioned, this limestone, what is absolutely not there in Latvia. So it's very wood-centered in Latvia, and even this history of this log buildings which can be moved, like, but it's like it's in a way like not so much focused on heavy construction. So I think that you see also in the presentations that for our way of, like, we look very much at the Latvian history for what we do. So we end up with a lot of timber architecture, a lot of lightweight, movable objects. And for your context and like also for you, like it's more this heavy weight architecture. So there's a really, I think, a big influence, like also where you are based and what comes out of it.
Yeah, I think what I find interesting in what you're saying is that, yeah, the materials, they do have limits. And I think it's important to say that doing this kind of work is very difficult. It's really hard to build in stone and in hempcrete because we're kind of going against all of the industrial habits, all of the sort of level of comfort that the building industry has with working with concrete, especially in France, where concrete has a sort of huge lobby on the construction industry after the reconstruction. And I think what Thibaut was saying earlier about caring is that, like, you really have to want to do it in order to make it happen, because we're constantly confronted with obstacles which can be regulatory, normative obstacles, which can be economical obstacles, which can be construction obstacles, because it's hard to find builders that have the knowledge or are willing to take the risk. And I think that this question about how we're dealing with risk and how we're dealing with the limits of these materials is really interesting, and it was what I wanted to sort of ask to all of you, because we're always confronted with this question of risk and confronted with the fact that we're kind of heading into unknown territory every time that we are engaging one of these constructive projects. And for us, I feel like we've been learning a lot of lessons lately in relation to that, and how do we navigate within a regulatory framework that exists? How do we sort of manipulate it in order to be able to build what we're trying to do? Or how do we work with those who are sort of that are structuring the regulations today in order to make things move forward? How do we find the right partners? And also, how do we sort of relate to the question of risk and experimentation and the potential that maybe we're going to try something and it's not going to work out. You know, we didn't present it today, but we've been doing over the last couple of years some experiments in building laboratories looking at prefabricating hempcrete facade systems. And it's a long process, and it's really interesting, but sometimes we test things and we don't get the results that we were looking for. But we find that really interesting because we're learning a lot. We think that it's important also sometimes to put our sort of architectural ego to one side, so that, you know, it's trial and error, we make mistakes and we move forward, and that what's important is to sort of keep trying. And so, yeah, maybe that's a question that I would like to ask to all of you, is sort of what are you trying with, how are you experimenting, and how are you dealing with this question sort of risk with building with materials, with building with natural materials and circularity today in sort of your respective context.
Should we open up to the audience as well?
Is that a question to the audience, maybe?
Maybe.
Because there are a lot of architects here as well. I mean, all of them are architects. Architects, interior architects, landscape architects. Should be interesting to hear if anybody has taken risks recently.
Risky comments, guys. Anyone? Okay.
Sorry, no, I'm not an architect.
Architecture historian.
Just a historian and critic. Thank you so much for super inspiring presentations. As a critic, I need to provoke, maybe tease. You all spoke from the perspective of either, let's say, you are working in a very small scale, either in the academia or in your offices. The key question for me, which you have only briefly addressed today, is how actually to scale the things up so that it will actually have a large impact on the environment as well as the society. Because if you stay in your laboratories, either in your office or at the academia, the impact never reaches where it should end up. This is, I feel almost sorry for you. It is super inspiring, but how and what are the, I don't know, what are the main difficulties you feel there are? Is it regulatory? Is it, I don't know. It's just, this is the main question, the elephant in the room for me. Thank you.
I want to take this as a, just in relation especially to the, to what we have seen working on this big master plan project in London, where the council approached the university to include architecture students to the project. And me and Roland, when we started setting up the brief, then we thought, oh, we'll introduce to them the idea of a material bank. They knew it. We will introduce whatever technical difficulties that it might like this sort of material reuse might bring along. They knew all of it, right? Suddenly we were like, hang on, why did they turn to us? What do they actually want? And then we realized that one missing component in a large project like this is designerly knowledge, in the way that now that these, I mean, a 10,000 home master plan, that they're even thinking about material reuse. They have a big team, a team of lawyers, a team of insurers, like a big technical team. They wanted to know, okay, but what can we do with this? How can we create spaces that maybe differ in their feel, in their looks, from the, like, whatever architecture that's currently, like, kind of maybe done or built in the mainstream housing sector. So there are places where we can come in as architects, and that we shouldn't forget as well, that we have an agency there, and also we have an agency to ask as designers as well, does that type of care and does that type of architecture like look and feel different to what it has been looking and feeling in the mainstream up until now. The other point I wanted to make is that we're not disillusioned that next year everyone will be building of circular and natural materials. It's not going to happen. We definitely all have to be in for the long run, which is hard, I think, and this transition will take a while. It will hopefully, you know, I hope that it will take quite a lot of magazine articles that show and tell about success stories, why it's important, etc. It will also take small-scale projects that pave the way. The other thing is that I'm actually quite worried about is the speed at which it sometimes gets scaled up. Again, what we saw in London is there's already the biggest landowner and developer in London is already hands-on, like reusing steel on vast projects, on projects that are not necessary even in the 21st century context, I would say. They're taking down a building made of steel in the 80s, and they're rebuilding a new tower out of the, like partially reusing that same steel. What they're saying is now that it's reused steel. So they're now using this knowledge that has been produced often in academias by smaller practices. They've scaled up to a level where it's already like countering the initial purpose of it. So I would say that if it comes very quickly, there's even a bit of a worry there that maybe it's not done meaningfully anymore. So it's done only in this like kind of greenwashing way. Yeah.
No, that's, your question is fundamental, and it's very important, and we have to be humble, but still very ambitious with it. So we work on different scales. On the building we built in massive stones in 2017. Right after this building, let's say that the building, 18% of the weight of the building is made of stone, more or less, you know. So it's not much, actually. It's a small quarter of it, 1 to 5. But let's say after this building, we said, okay, if we are the only one doing stones, it won't be efficient as an impact of on the building industry in our level of, let's say, just Paris, just a metropolis in Europe. So we decided to make an exhibition. So we made an exhibition a year after, and we identified all the quarries around Paris. We described their capacity of production, extraction. We described very precisely the types of stones that was able to be extracted from all these quarries. And then we gave phone numbers of the people in charge of the quarries to everyone during this exhibition. We, of course, very briefly but very intensively with engineers demonstrated the carbon footprint related to the stone construction compared to the wood construction and the concrete construction. So it's you have relations, and of course wood is above, and then stone right behind, and then concrete way far behind. But after that exhibition, a lot of building out of stones happened in Paris and in France, and maybe also in the very short parts of in England, in Switzerland. And we were not the first one, of course. We had J.P. Rodin before us, we had, of course, Pouillon before us. And I think this is what we are most proud of, is the fact that now we have more and more stone buildings happening in our very limited territory, which is France, which is not a lot, but it's still that we have in our hands. And we were happy about the building, but super happy about the fact that the ambition and the goal was to spread the words, and to share knowledge, and to say that if we are the only one, well, this is super useless, but if we all do it, then things could change. But of course, it's let's say that we're kind of happy about that, really. So I think that the scale of it is rather than the amount of building than the scale of the project. Because if you stay lonely in your practice, and I think that's something that is very different in our generation, that we all believe that we don't feel lonely anymore, rather than the generation before. Everyone was doing his own practice, defining his own language, and I'm doing this and you're doing that, and we kind of compete one to each other. And I believe that we don't do that anymore. And I think we spread the word, we share the knowledges, and I think that's a huge shift. But still, the fight is going on, and for instance, with the tower we're showing, beside the scale of it, we are still, like Heather was saying, fighting against the developer and contractors that want to put concrete columns in the facade. And to us it's fine, it's okay to put a concrete column in the facade. But we're trying still to convince people that stone can be load-bearing, and we're trying to put the concrete away from the facade as less as possible. So it still fights every day, but I'm quite sure that it goes better and better and better, and we all together trying to do it better and better and better.
And I think also one common thing was that we are all teaching actually. So I think there's for every one of us like some thought behind, like how do we have some impact, and at least for us, but the idea was like we identified quite early, like we are only 2 people in the office, so like how can we change anything in the building sector, at least in Latvian scale. And one thing we identified was to work with students, because they will come out of the studies and join, in most cases, our offices. So they are the ones who can bring in quite fast the change in already established offices. The next thing is, of course, then working closely together with policymakers, like because we can't, even with the wildest ideas or best ideas what we have, we can't fight the legal system. So we have to have the lawmakers on our side and have kind of strong lobbying in that sector to also lobby against all the ones who are against change. So that is like, I think there's two major points what we try to do, and it's not so much about the scale of the projects, because actually at the beginning it's about the number of projects you have. Like you have to show, even on a small scale, oh, this one is a direction what is possible to do, and then you can later upscale it. But first, like making these experiments and say, okay, look, that is possible. That is a really important thing.
Yeah, it's on the lobbying. We were actually in one of the recent interviews. We were titled as the Latvian lobby architects because of the amount of discussions we actually do in the policy making level. But it's a thing we never thought we would have to do, but you have to do it. But yeah, I think really this work with students and seeing them as the next persons who grow further, so we don't see the academia as something like where we only like develop and stays inside, but we really see that it's like it's a hand into the industry with like us too speaking to 10, 15, 20, 30 people, and they go out and also start doing those things. So I think that's for us the strongest aspect for later upscaling.
There is a very nice saying that goes like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So we're aiming for the far right, I think. Is there any other maybe questions?
My question is simple. Like, how many more comments you want to give, because we're running out of time? I will give you all a couple of minutes to wrap up the topic. We see that it's mostly about educated people and then making consumers make the right choices, that the old material is as good as the new one.
What was that? A comment or?
That was the wrapping sentence. Thanks for the panel and for the silence. Moment of silence. Now what we have left is the lunch break, and it takes us 40 minutes to fill the stomachs. And when we're back here, we switch back to ESLi. Thank you. Let's do the next question.